unfold.
The Stanford Prison Experiment. I mean, just say those three words.
Mm-hmm.
And for most people, this whole chilling story just clicks right into place.
Right. It's been the definitive story about human evil for, over 50 years now?
Exactly. The idea that any of us, no matter how good or stable we think we are, we're just one bad situation away from becoming, well, either a monster or a victim.
It's the ultimate cautionary tale. But it's so much more than that, isn't it? It's not just some story in a textbook. It's become this secular parable.
Yeah.
Phil Zimbardo's Lucifer effect. The whole idea that the situation just strips away your morality and turns ordinary people into something else. And that belief has had huge real-world consequences.
I mean, it's shaped prison policy. It's in every single intro to psych course.
And maybe most disturbingly, it's been used in court. In legal defenses to explain away and sometimes even absolve people involved in actual atrocities.
It's the story that lets us all say, don't blame the person, blame the system. And there's a real comfort in that, right? It's simple.
It is. But here's the thing. That whole towering story, that whole foundation for how we understand evil, it's built on a lie, a deliberate one.
For decades, Zimbardo was just a master of PR. The raw data was locked away. But then, around 2018, things started to change.
Massively. Thanks to some really meticulous archival work from researchers like 𝐏𝐿𝐿 and Ben Blum, the source material was, it wasn't just questioned, it was completely dismantled.
And that really is the mission for you in this deep dive. We are setting aside that standard story you think you know.
Completely. We're looking at what is essentially a debunking dossier. We're talking raw footage, internal documents, the actual tapes that were hidden for years.
And the goal here is to reframe the entire experiment. This wasn't some scientific tragedy that spiraled out of control.
No. The sources show it was a masterpiece of directorial manipulation.
You have to stop thinking of it as science and start seeing it as, what, a staged play? A reality TV show before reality TV was even a thing.
Exactly. With the director, Zimbardo, who had this massive personal and professional stake in manufacturing a horror story that just happened to prove his theory.
So if you accept that, the whole conflict of the story changes. It's not guards versus prisoners anymore.
Not at all. The real conflict is the messy, chaotic, resilient truth of human nature versus a director who was desperate to make sure his actors hit their marks and deliver his pre-written, horrifying conclusion.
He needed villains, he needed victims, he needed a breakdown, and he was going to get it even if he had to coach the lines himself. Okay, let's unpack this. But before we get to the lie, we have to start with the story the world bought for half a century. The standard narrative. What was it?
Right. You have to know the myth to appreciate the debunking.
So, set the stage for us.
Okay, so picture it. It's August 1971. We're in the basement of Jordan Hall at Stanford University. A hallway has been converted into this makeshift prison.
And the participants.
24 male college students. And the story goes that they were all screened, extensively. They were the best and brightest, healthy, normal, psychologically stable.
And the critical part of the whole setup, the thing that makes the science supposedly work, is the randomization.
Absolutely crucial. They were randomly assigned by a coin toss to be a guard or a prisoner. The lore stresses this over and over because it's the linchpin of the whole Lucifer effect.
The idea being that personality played zero role.
Zero. They were good apples, completely interchangeable, who were then dropped into a bad barrel, the prison itself, and the situation just took over. Instantly and totally.
And the guard's instructions, the narrative makes a huge deal about how spontaneous all the abuse was.
Yes, according to Zimbardo's official reports, the guards got no specific training, just a very vague instruction to maintain order.
So they get the props, the uniform, the billy club.
The mirrored sunglasses. So important. They give you that anonymity, that psychological distance. And the power of the whole story rests on the idea that with no instructions, the guards just spontaneously became monsters.
So the cruelty wasn't taught, it just emerged from the situation itself.
Precisely. The myth is that they naturally slipped into sadistic abuse. They came up with the cruel punishments on their own, push-ups in the middle of the night, psychological games, all these dehumanizing rituals.
The uniform basically unlocked something that was already inside them.
That's the terrifying implication. And it happened fast, within days, which made the whole thing feel so immediate, so relevant.
And on the other side of that coin, you have the prisoners. Their rapid collapse is what gives the story its emotional weight.
Oh, absolutely. The psychological toll was supposedly immediate and profound. And the most famous example, the one moment that everyone knows, is prisoner 8612, Douglas Corpy.
The audio recording.
That visceral, agonizing, screaming fit. You can hear him just yelling that he's burning up inside and begging to be released.
And that soundbite became the proof. The undeniable proof that this wasn't a game anymore, that the psychological damage was real.
Exactly. It proved the situation was too powerful to contain. And that moment, coupled with how the experiment ended, it seals the whole narrative as a tragedy.
Right. It was cut short. It was supposed to be 2 weeks, but they only made it 6 days.
And the story there is that Zimbardo's future wife, Christina Maslach, who was also a graduate student, she came in, saw the abuse, and was horrified. She basically pulled him out of his role as prison superintendent.
So she's the hero of the story. She snaps him out of it.
She's the moral hero. Zimbardo is the tragic scientist, blinded by his own creation. The guards prove anyone can be evil, and the prisoners prove anyone can be breaking. It's a perfect, neat, horrifying story.
But why was that story, that specific version of it, so seductive? Not just to the public, but to other scientists, too.
I think it's because it's deeply, deeply absolving. Think about the time, the early 70s. The Vietnam War is still raging. You've got stories of dehumanization coming out of that. You've got massive prison riots at home, like Attica and San Quentin.
The world was looking for an explanation for all this cruelty.
And Zimbardo handed them one on a silver platter.
A convenient psychological shield.
Totally. Because if the SPE proves that the system inevitably makes good people do bad things, then individual moral failure isn't really the issue.
It takes the blame off the individual.
Exactly. The guards at Stanford were victims of the system, just like the soldiers in Vietnam or the real guards at Attica.
Yeah.
It suggests that if you just fix the bad barrel, the problem of evil just goes away.
It's a much easier problem to solve than, confronting the reality that some people just choose to be monstrous.
It was the story the world wanted to believe, because it explained away horror without making us look too closely at individual choices and accountability.
And as we're about to see, that story was crafted from the very beginning to deliver that exact comforting message.
Okay, let's pull back the curtain. This is where it gets really interesting. The myth is that Zimbardo had this original idea, a pure scientific journey. But what if it wasn't original at all? What if the whole thing was a remake with a pre-written script? That is the first bombshell in the debunking dossier. The idea that this was some spontaneous inquiry is shattered by the Toyin Hall precursor.
Okay, tell us about Toyin Hall. The sources, particularly 𝐏𝐿𝐃𝐂𝐂𝐓's work, show this was not a first draft.
Not even close. Just 3 months before the famous experiment, an undergraduate at Stanford named 𝐏𝐿𝐃𝐂𝐓 ran a similar, smaller simulation in his dorm, Toyin Hall.
So when Zimbardo decided to do his big version...
He didn't start from scratch. He used 𝐿𝐃𝐂𝐓's experiment as a literal step-by-step blueprint.
So he wasn't inventing the mechanisms of horror, he was just adapting a script he already knew worked?
He was, and we can see it in the details. The infamous 17 rules for the prisoners in the SPE, the ones Zimbardo later claimed, showed the guards spontaneous authoritarian creativity.
Let me guess, he lifted them.
Almost wholesale from the Toyin Hall rulebook, including the specific procedures designed for maximum degradation.
Give us an example. What's a specific technique that was copied?
The most notorious one was the counts, waking the prisoners up in the middle of the night, forcing them into formation, making them recite their numbers over and over again.
Right, to break them down.
To instill frustration, to make them feel like just a number. 𝐿𝐃𝐂𝐓 had already figured out that this was a really powerful tool for getting the psychological response he wanted in his dorm experiment. Zimbardo just imported it. He was guaranteeing a certain kind of drama from the start.
So the very things that were held up as proof of the guards' spontaneous slide into sadism were actually just pre-written stage directions.
Exactly. And this explains why he hired 𝐏𝐿𝐃𝐂𝐓, not just as some assistant, but as the warden, the assistant director.
𝐿𝐃𝐂𝐓's job was to make sure the remake hit all the same beats as the original.
He was the expert in manufacturing the horror Zimbardo wanted to film. It shifts the whole thing from a journey of discovery to an exercise in replication. Replicating drama, not scientific findings.
Which means the conclusion was basically baked in before a single participant walked into that basement.
It was.
Okay, let's talk about casting. The whole Lucifer effect theory rests on 2 pillars. The situation and the fact that the participants were normal and randomly assigned. If that's not true, the whole thing just falls apart.
And the archive shows it isn't true. There's a massive, massive flaw in how they recruited people. It goes right back to the ad they put in the paper.
What did the ad say?
It was in the Palo Alto Times, and it specifically asked for volunteers for a psychological study of prison life.
Prison life, that specific phrase is the problem.
It's a huge scientific flaw. We know this from later research, a great study by Carnahan and McFarlane in 2007. They basically reran the ad.
And what did they find?
They found that that specific wording doesn't attract a random sample of people. It creates a profound self-selection bias.
So who volunteers for a prison life study?
People who score significantly higher on traits like aggression, authoritarianism, and social dominance. And crucially, they scored lower on things like empathy and altruism.
Wow. So Zimbardo didn't start with good apples. He specifically, if unintentionally, put out a call for apples that were, already a bit bruised in exactly the way that would help his drama.
Precisely. The claim that personality played no role is just. It's gone. The participants were not psychologically interchangeable. The deck was stacked from the very beginning to get the kind of people who would be more willing to play the part of a cruel guard.
That changes it from a study about a situation to a study about what happens when you put a bunch of aggressive people in a tense environment and tell them to run it.
It turns it into a confirmation bias exercise. He set it up, consciously or not, to get the outcome he needed.
So the casting was biased. What about the rehearsal? The official story is no specific training. That sounds like one of those things that's technically true but psychologically false.
It's exactly that. They didn't get, formal police training. But what happened in that guard orientation was a table read. It was the director telling his actors what he needed from them.
So he gave them their motivation.
He gave them very clear stage directions. We have the quotes from Zimbardo himself. He explicitly told the guards, we're going to take away their individuality in various ways. We're going to create a sense of powerlessness.
He literally wrote the psychological states he wanted on a blackboard, right? Fear, boredom.
Fear, boredom, frustration. Now, imagine you're a college kid in that room. The lead scientist is telling you that the goal of the experiment, the definition of success, is to make other people feel afraid and frustrated.
That is not a neutral briefing. That is a direct order.
It creates what psychologists call demand characteristics. The participants knew exactly what the researcher wanted. They understood that being abusive and dominating was how you win the experiment.
So their cruelty wasn't some spontaneous eruption of evil. It was an act of obedience. They were trying to be good subjects.
They were trying to please the director. We know from Milgram and other studies that people are incredibly motivated to do what the authority figure in the room tells them to do.
So the evil that Zimbardo found wasn't a product of the situation. It was a product of his instructions.
He handed them the script for cruelty and told them that a good performance would lead to good science. It's a totally different moral equation.
Okay, so we have the plagiarized script, the biased cast, the explicit coaching. Now let's get to the production itself, the 6 days. This is where we can really see the official story versus the archival reality, scene by scene.
Right. Let's start with day one, the arrests.
This wasn't just show up at the lab at 9 a.m.
Oh, no. This was pure theater. Zimbardo needed a dramatic opening, something for the cameras that would immediately set the tone.
And he got the actual Palo Alto Police Department to cooperate.
Fully. They lent the whole thing this air of official severity. Students were picked up at their homes on a Sunday. There were real squad cars, sirens, public arrests, handcuffs, the whole 9 yards.
Wait, so Zimbardo was basically directing a short film on the streets of Palo Alto. The level of pre-production is it's not science.
It was about blurring the line between reality and simulation. Disorienting the prisoners, establishing power for the guards. It was all about maximum dramatic impact.
But the sources suggest that for some of the students, this huge, elaborate setup just reinforced the idea that it was a game.
That's the key backfire. For a guy like Dave Eshelman, the guard who became John Wayne, the handcuffs and the police cars, it was all just a sign that he was on a really high-budget movie set.
So the degradation that followed, the stripping, the delousing, the smocks, it wasn't real trauma, it was just
costumes and makeup. The more over-the-top the setup was, the more it felt like they were supposed to put on a show.
The tone was set for performance from minute one.
Absolutely.
Okay, day 2. This is where we get the prisoner rebellion. In the official story, this is the moment it all becomes real.
Right. The prisoners barricade their cell doors, and the guards have to spontaneously figure out how to crush the uprising.
But the archival reality is that this was the moment the director realized his production was failing.
I mean, not all the actors were sticking to the script. And this is where we find the most damaging piece of evidence in the entire archive. the 𝐏𝐎𝐃 tape.
Okay, so what was the problem? Why were they failing?
Because some of the guards were being too nice. After the rebellion, some guards were really into the punishment, but others, they were hesitant. They felt bad for the prisoners. Their empathy was getting in the way.
The soft guards.
The soft guards. And Zimbardo and 𝐏𝐻 were panicking. Their whole experiment was about to fall apart because half their cast of villains refused to be villains.
So they had a choice. Observe what was actually happening or intervene to force the drama.
And they chose intervention. They completely shattered the pretense of objective observation. The 𝐏𝐻 tape is a recording of 𝐏𝐻 the warden taking one of the soft guards aside and literally coaching him on how to be more cruel.
He told him what to do.
He told him, point blank, and this is a quote, that every guard is going to be what we call a tough guard. You have to kind of try and get it in you.
Wow. But it gets worse, right?
But
He ties the cruelty directly to the success of the science.
this is the smoking gun. 𝐏𝐻 says to the guard, whether or not we can make this thing seem like a prison depends largely on the guard's behavior.
Let's just stop on that for a second. That one sentence it destroys everything.
It does.
The spontaneous cruelty was actually mandatory for the experiment to be considered a success by the researchers themselves.
It completely reframes every action the guards took. They weren't becoming sadists. They were following orders to avoid failing the experiment. Kindness was a failure of the science.
So the study isn't about the power of the situation. It's about the power of obedience to an authority figure who is demanding a specific cruel outcome.
It's a Milgram experiment disguised as a prison simulation. The research team was actively shaping the data they claimed to be just observing.
Okay, so the villains were coached. Day 3 is where we get the defining victim. Prisoner 8612, Douglas 𝐏𝐃𝐂𝐄𝐓. His breakdown is the moment that proved the experiment was dangerously real.
It's the emotional climax of the whole myth, but the truth behind it is maybe the most shocking twist of all.
Which is?
His breakdown was, by his own admission, a performance. He was not having a psychotic break. He was acting.
Acting? To do what? Why would he fake a breakdown?
He was a pre-med student, and he was desperate to study for his GREs. He figured he'd have some downtime, but the guards, following Zimbardo's no individuality script, took his books away.
So he decided it wasn't worth the $15 a day. He wanted out.
He went to Zimbardo and asked to be released. But Zimbardo, who was now fully in his role as the superintendent, refused. He said letting him quit would break the realism for everyone else.
Which is a huge ethical breach. False imprisonment, basically.
It is. And Zimbardo told him he could only leave for a medical reason. So 𝐏𝐃𝐂𝐄𝐓, realizing he was trapped, made a completely rational decision. He said, okay, you want a medical reason, I'll give you one. He decided to act his way out.
And he admitted this later.
Yep. In a 2017 interview with Ben Blum, he said, I was faking. I'm more hysterical than psychotic. That famous line, I'm burning up inside.
Yeah, an ad-lib.
Theatrical ad-lib to make sure the director bought the performance and let him go.
The irony is just staggering. The single moment used for decades as proof of extreme psychological trauma was actually a student performing a monologue to escape a breach of contract.
It completely inverts the whole narrative. The guy who seemed the craziest was actually the most rational person in the entire room. He figured out the only logical way to escape Zimbardo's coercive control.
Okay, so after that drama, the stage is now set for the main villain, the guard nicknamed John Wayne, Dave Eshelman. He is the poster child for the Lucifer effect.
He really is. The good kid who just spontaneously transforms into this terrifying sadist. But again, the archives show this was much closer to method acting than a real psychological change.
He was an aspiring actor, right?
It was. And he said he treated the whole thing as an improv exercise. He wasn't channeling some inner demon. He was consciously creating a character.
And where did he get the character from, that famous Southern accent he used?
It wasn't his accent. He was mimicking the actor Strother Martin, who played the brutal warden in the movie Cool Hand Luke.
So it was a conscious, self-aware performance.
Completely. And his motivation wasn't a lust for power. He said he was just trying to do what he thought the researchers wanted. He was actually running his own little side experiment.
Which was what?
He wanted to see how far he could push the abuse before Zimbardo, the director, would finally step in and yell, cut.
But Zimbardo never did, because Eshelman was giving him exactly the dramatic footage he needed.
Zimbardo's silence was a green light. It was tacit encouragement. Great stuff, keep it coming. So Eshelman's cruelty-making prisoners cleaned toilets with their bare hands. It wasn't stopped, because it was the perfect evidence for Zimbardo's theory. He was just a student trying to get an A+ in the class by being the most committed actor.
And this really shows Zimbardo's critical failure. He was supposed to be the researcher, protecting the participants, but he was also the superintendent, an actor in the play who was invested in the drama.
He put the outcome ahead of safety. He completely lost his objectivity. And the participants, they were further convinced they couldn't just quit because of these elaborate parole board scenes.
Right, with the ex-con, Carlo Prescott.
Exactly. They'd have this formal hearing, and it just reinforced the idea that this was real, that they were legally trapped. So they kept playing the submissive inmate role, not because they were broken, but because they thought they had no other choice.
It was all theater, designed to keep the actors on stage.
Right down to the end.
Day 6, the finale. The standard story gives us this romantic, redemptive ending where Christina Maslach saves the day.
And that story works perfectly for Zimbardo. He gets to be the good man who was temporarily corrupted, saved by the moral clarity of his future wife. It's a great ending.
But the debunking perspective suggests a much more practical reason for stopping.
A much more pragmatic one. From a production standpoint, the experiment was a success. Zimbardo had all his money shots.
He had the breakdown from Corpy, he had the rebellion, and he had the perfect sadist in Eshelman.
He had everything he needed to write the New York Times Magazine article and secure his fame. The experiment didn't end because of a sudden moral awakening. It ended because the director had enough footage in the can, and it's time to go to the editing room.
The show was a success. Time to wrap production.
Exactly.
So the experiment is over, but in many ways, the most important part was just beginning. The post-production, selling the myth.
And this is where Zimbardo's genius for PR really shines. The normal scientific process is you submit your work for peer review. You let other scientists pick it apart.
He didn't do that.
He bypassed it completely, a huge breach of protocol. He went straight to the public, publishing his findings in the New York Times Magazine right after the experiment ended.
A masterstroke of marketing. He fixed the narrative in the public's mind before anyone could question the methods.
By the time other scientists could say, hey, what about the coaching? What about the selection bias? It was too late. The story was already a legend.
And the timing, again, was perfect.
It was. With the riots at Attica and San Quentin, the country was desperate for an answer to prison violence. And Zimbardo gave them a simple one. It's the situation. He became an instant cultural icon.
But years later, a crack appeared in that story from Carlo Prescott, the ex-con consultant.
Right. In 2005, he wrote an op-ed in the Stanford Daily, basically denouncing the study.
And what was his claim?
He claimed that the guards' most creative and cruel techniques weren't spontaneous at all. He said they were ideas that he'd given to Zimbardo and the research team based on his own time in San Quentin.
So the cruelty wasn't even invented by the students. It was fed to them by an external consultant.
If you believe Prescott, yes. It means the study was contaminated from another direction. Spontaneous sadism becomes guided, sourced cruelty.
Zimbardo denied it, of course. But it just shows how fragile the whole story was. It relied on everyone staying quiet.
The moment one of the props spoke out, the illusion started to crumble.
And this all leads to the darkest legacy of the experiment. The moment this academic lie was used to defend real-world atrocities. Abu Ghraib.
2004. The photos of the abuse of Iraqi detainees come out, and the world is horrified. And this is the perfect moment for Zimbardo to step back into the spotlight.
He served as an expert witness for one of the guards, Ivan Chip Frederick.
He did. And his defense was classic Lucifer effect. Frederick was a good apple in a bad barrel. He argued the system at Abu Ghraib was the real villain, which should mitigate Frederick's personal responsibility.
The irony is just, it's breathtaking. He used a fake experiment where cruelty was coached and performed to defend a soldier involved in real torture.
It's devastating, because if you accept that the SPE guards were just following Zimbardo's directions, then the parallel he draws to Abu Ghraib suggests something much darker.
That maybe Frederick was also just following orders from his own command structure.
Exactly. So the SPE defense becomes this powerful tool to let the people at the top off the hook. It allows the system's architects to say the situation just went wrong, when the SPE archives show that even artificial cruelty needs direction from above.
He used a lie to hide the truth in a real-world tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, you have to look at the man himself. Zimbardo. He seems less like a scientist and more like an auteur, obsessed with his own mythology.
His whole career shows this fascination with grand narratives. After decades of being the expert on evil because of the SPE, he completely shifts his focus to the psychology of heroism.
It's the ultimate main character move.
It really is. He positions the SPE as his tragic descent into the underworld, and his later work is his redemption, where he returns as a hero to teach us all how to resist evil. It's a great story for his life.
And to protect that story, he can never, ever admit the SPE was a sham.
Never. Admitting the coaching, the plagiarism, it would rewrite his entire career as a fraud.
Right.
He has to defend the myth because he's defending his own identity as his tragic visionary.
And you can see in his own journals how deeply he fell into the role of superintendent.
He wasn't a passive observer. He wrote about walking differently, with his hands behind his back like a general. He wore the sunglasses. He felt the power of the role.
He was the actor who was most seduced by his own production.
He lost all objectivity, not because the situation forced him to, but because he embraced the role of the all-powerful director. The real tragedy isn't that the guards became evil. It's that the scientist became the director of deception.
Okay, so let's try to sum this all up. We've gone through the whole thing, scene by scene. What is the fundamental twist here?
The twist is that the Stanford Prison Experiment was not a valid scientific study into evil. It was never that.
It was a theatrical production, designed from day one to confirm a theory he already had. The study didn't go wrong. It went exactly as scripted.
It did. The villain here isn't the situation. The villain is the manipulation of science for fame. The cruelty had to be coaxed out. It had to be directed. The guards were just students trying to pass a test.
And the experiment was so seductive because it gave us all an easy out. It told us we're not responsible for our choices when the pressure is on.
The system made them do it. The situation is absolute.
But the truth the archives reveal is so much more complicated and, honestly, more unsettling.
It is. Because if this archive proves that even manufactured evil, fake evil, requires coaching and direction and consent, if kindness was the thing that kept trying to break the script, what does that say about real-world atrocities?
What does that mean for individual accountability when people are in these coercive systems?
Right. Does knowing that Zimbardo had to actively direct the cruelty, that he had to stop his participants from being nice, does that change how you look at reports of spontaneous evil in the world today?
Maybe the lie of evil is that we're all just helpless pawns.
And maybe the unsettling truth is that even in the worst situations, it still requires people to actively choose to play the part of the monster. And that choice, that individual accountability, is the one thing Zimbardo's story tried so hard to erase.